Just before we start, just to let those of you who are on that this will be recorded so we can share it with others. So, and that'll be messaged out not too long after this session. Okay, kia ora tātou. Māku I tīmata tō tātou hui. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura he tio he hoka, he hauhu a ti hei mauri ora. Te mihi tuatahi ki te rangatira kua hinga nei, Pom Gillies, takato, takato, takato. Ka hoki au ki a tātou te kanohi ora. Tātou, tēnei te tino mihi kia koutou kua tai mai nei, kei tēnei tō tātou hui I pana ki nā kaupapa here whānui o Pouhere Taonga. Nā reira, tēnei te tino mihi mō tō kaingātou. Wonderful to have you all on this morning, and thank you for taking the time. Now, we're here to talk about the statements of general policy, which we're reviewing, which we do every 10 years. And so since our 2014 Act, 10 years has come around, of course, 2024. So we really want to seek, responses on this, kōrero suggestions for how we can implement what sits in our Act through the work that we do. So this is a wonderful opportunity just to give you an overview of the review process, but of course really getting your input on that against the draft. So we'll just go to the next slide if we can. And part of this is, of course, in a moment I'll give you an overview of that. But we've got some wonderful people from our team to support this today and to really lead out some of these sections. So we've got Sonia coming in on our advocacy statements, Markere also coming in on our archaeology statement. Dennis Nāwhare will be coming in talking about our recognition areas. So this is the list and landmark statements, and I'll cover off in terms of our properties. And then we've got our opportunity for questions. But what I'd encourage you to do while we're talking through our presentation, which probably take about, 15, 20 minutes, is pop things in the chat, those questions in there, and we'll come back to them, but there'll be an opportunity at the end where we can have a broader discussion as well. So, and depending on how many of you, you might be able just to raise your hand at that point as well and ask us directly. So yeah, encourage those questions in the chat as you think of things, and then we'll gather them up when we get to our pārtai section. So yeah, we'll move on to our first overview section. So of course, Heritage New Zealand Pouhere Taonga is a autonomous Crown entity. We sit under our Act, the Heritage New Zealand Pouhere Taonga Act 2014, and we're responsible for promoting the historical and cultural heritage of Aotearoa, New Zealand. So as I said, we're reviewing our existing statements. So we currently have 5 statements of general policy, which we are required to have, and this is a revision of that. So we've got the draft statements. So hopefully you've seen these already. I imagine you have, and that's why you're on the call. Written submissions are due by Sunday, the 9th of March. So there is some time. So it's great you're here today. Give some time to consider these. And of course, there are other options for coming in and discussing these things with us as well. Okay, we'll go to the next one. So these 5 statements of general policy. So they cover our statutory role of advocacy. So our advocacy statement, administration of our archaeological provisions in our Act, and I know that'll be an area of a lot of interest to you because that's where a lot of the interaction that we have with iwi Māori is in that space. We have the Heritage New Zealand list or rārangi kōrero, the list statement, and that's really important around recognition of wāhi tapu, wāhi tipuna, and as a kind of a component of that is our landmark statement. So that's this is around that that higher tier of recognition that came in with our 2014 Act. So that's a really important one if you're looking at stepping stones, not only as a national recognition, but those aspirations of some looking at World Heritage as well. And lastly is really our property statement, which is really, it's actually confined to the properties that we own, manage, or run, yeah. So that's really looking at those ones. But we have 45, 46 properties, which is quite a lot. We're around the country, and of course we're within your communities. So that's important in terms of those relationships over time. So those are the 5 statements. We're going to go into a little detail on each of them. And importantly, overall, what's changed? So we're looking at 1 document, not 5. So there was actually a lot of information in the past. 3 themes rather than 72 objectives. We'll talk about those themes in a moment. And 189 policies rather than 463. So it's actually a big mihi to our policy teams for working and really crunching that down into something that's actually more readable and accessible, I think is the really important thing, something we can actually work with and understand better. So anyway, those are the big changes in terms of volumes of, well, it's not so much paper now, but bandwidth at least. And what I've mentioned earlier is actually now we have 3 objectives that just sit above all of these 5 statements. So when we get to each statement section, these themes run through each of those statement areas. So the first one is, of course, how Heritage New Zealand Pouhere Taonga honours Te Tiriti and implements that through Tapawai. And if you're not familiar with that, that's our Māori Heritage Council statement on Māori heritage. And remembering also that the actual kind of construct of Pouhere Taonga is that we do have a board, and interconnected with that, so shared board members are also on our Māori Heritage Council. So they have specific roles in both those governance entities within the organisation, but be assured that both those entities actually overlap and work together as well. The other element is engagement is central to all the work of Heritage New Zealand as well, Pouhere Taonga. So we've recently developed an engagement plan that we work to. And top of that, of course, is those relationships with iwi. And sometimes that's underpinned by direct formal relationships around settlements, whakaitanga that come out of that. And some of you have probably worked through our Ara Taonga cluster of heritage sector agencies that we come under one whakaitanga. But it's all over the broader relationships or specific relationships that we have with you around the country as well. So it's looking at engagement being of that central value and driving thing that we look to now when we work. So that's how the statements are now orientated, or at least in this draft that you're considering. And then, of course, things that you would expect from us is really around delivers the best practice, whether that's in heritage recognition, conservation, and protection outcomes. So broadly, those are the objectives. So think about them when we're talking about these other, when we talk through the statements, because these are the things that are infused throughout. Kapai. So just as another overview, and this is a perspective that certainly from where we sit, how the heritage management system works. So there's really 3 levels to that, the sort of voluntary things that are done, the advisory and the regulatory roles. And you can see here at the top, the voluntary things, we have a thing called Tohu Whenua program, which is partnered with DOC and also with our ministry, the Ministry for Culture and Heritage. We have property interests, of course, and here are things like heritage covenants. So these are all tools used in that voluntary space, I guess, to raise understanding of values of heritage, and particularly Māori heritage. There's the advisory level. So Dennis will talk about the listing and recognition program, and that really elevates in the minds of New Zealanders the importance of places and relationships of places to communities. So listing, Dennis will talk about soon, but that's an important advisory process that we have within the organisation. And then, of course, the Crown land disposal process, which is really making sure that values and heritage is considered as part of that disposal process. At the bottom, of course, I know many of you work in and out of this all of the time. We have our archaeological authority process. It sits in the regulatory zone. Oh, sorry, I should have pointed out at the bottom, you see the sort of the spectrum of things that are in the information end and in the protection end. You can see our authority process sort of sits partly between two. Its predominant focus is, of course, the preservation of the knowledge through the authority process. So that's the archaeological information that can be derived through archaeological methods. Sometimes it can also be used in terms of protection as well. And Mark, you'll talk a little bit about that, but its predominant focus is around the preservation of information. There's the Building Act, of course, district plans and heritage orders, and of course Treaty Settlements Acts, which put down in very concrete terms a renewed relationship with the Crown, but also often specifies a lot of places and giving regard to, in terms of statutory acknowledgement areas, things that the Crown must take into consideration or honour. And finally, reserves, which is really that way of tying things together in a very protected way. And there's a variety of those, of course, that apply to things that you're interested in as well. So hopefully that gives you just an overall idea of the system. Of course, there is change afoot, as we know, and we think that this period of time, obviously with the fast track legislation, and of course later the RMN reforms next year, but these things will be enduring in terms of our role, but we've got this window of time in which we can also respond to those changes as they come through and as we start to confirm the statements of general policy. So anyway, let's go to the next slide. I'm just trying to remember the next slide there. Ka pai. So I'll hand this over to Sonia to kick us off, and ka pai. Kia ora, Sonia, ngā mihi.
Tēnā koutou, I rauranga tērā mā. He uri tēnei no Ngāti Toa ki te wai Pounamu no Ngāti Pākehā hoki, ko Sonia Mitchell toko ingoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I just want to flag before I start that I'm not a planner, but that I speak with a lot of planners in my policy role. So I'll just do my best to sort of unpack what's in the advocacy statement. So firstly, I've listed here the ways that we're seeking to drive a step change in heritage conservation and protection. And that includes by influencing and delivering more effective recognition, conservation and protection. So good practice heritage management, if you like. We also aim to communicate and promote the value of cultural heritage. So that's sort of educative role, I suppose, and we work in heritage advocacy together with hapu, iwi, communities and groups. And that includes advocating for the conservation and protection of historic places, wahi tupuna, wahi tapu areas, as appropriate to iwi and hapu. That can include things like aiming to get sites included on council schedules to provide protection. And as part of that work, we recognise iwi management plans, and we uphold the treaty settlements that we've committed to, and Dean's previously talked to those sort of overarching objectives we have around honouring Te Tiriti and the Tapuwai statement as well. And just that picture, sorry, I should speak to that picture, is of people from Puku Te Raki Marae, together with staff from Heritage New Zealand, Pouhere Taonga and other organisations. Doc is there as well. And that's the launch of the tohu whenua at Huri Awa Pa in Karetane, and that was just earlier this year. So that I think there's a couple of photos from that day in this presentation. Yeah. So if we can just go to the next slide. So I've included in here a table that appears in that draft policy statement, which is wasn't in the previous version of the policy statement. So I thought it was worth just flagging. It doesn't mark a change as such because Heritage New Zealand has since 2022 sort of worked to guidelines that these are the minimum standards, and I just emphasize they're the minimum, so they certainly don't stop us advocating for higher standards. But it was about Heritage New Zealand being sort of transparent about what standards it's talking about when it speaks with councils. It's ultimately councils that decide what level of protection sites get in the schedules, but this is us being clear about what we see as the absolute minimum while supporting higher standards. So just a few things, and it might be worth people, I'm guessing there's some planners here, you may be interested to compare this with the standards from the New Zealand Planning Institute, for example, because I understand there are a few differences. So one is the one on demolition, which here is non-complying for the most significant sites. But some of you may be aware that in some plans of councils, it's sorry, I'm just going off all my different notes. It's non-complying, full stop. And similarly for relocation, it's got here as controlled, but some plans may have that as discretionary or as something more restrictive. So it's worth just comparing what's in there to think about what sort of standards we're applying in Heritage New Zealand when we're speaking with councils. So I'll just go on to the next slide. Thank you. So some things to just be aware of with the advocacy statement. And there's an increased focus on intangible connections with place as well as with tangible. So that's a wee bit of a shift from the previous version of the policy statement. It seeks to respond to climate change. So, for example, it states that Heritage New Zealand can support the relocation of cultural heritage. For example, where hapu, iwi and hapori Māori have decided on relocation. It talks about that we don't support development activity on significant archaeological sites, including urupa and pa. And that we provide protection for the cultural heritage value of all urupa and final resting places. There's also a section that you'll see in all of the policy statements around recovering costs. And Heritage New Zealand, it states in the policy statement, will consult with all key stakeholders on any sort of charging regime. And then I haven't got it listed there, but there's also a new sort of reporting requirement for Heritage New Zealand. So we'll be publishing an assessment of local authority performance in heritage management. And that's something that might be of interest to iwi and hapu to sort of see how that management of heritage and cultural places is playing out from one region to the next. Yeah, so that's it from me. Kia ora koutou. And I think who's coming in next? I think it's Mākere on archaeology. Kia ora, Mākere.
Yeah, kia ora, Sonia. Kia ora, Mākere.
Kia ora, Sonia. Morena tātou, ko Mākere Rakahiki taku ingoa, i te taha tōku māmā kui anō te Pouhere Waikato. Engari, i te taha tōku pāpā kui anō te wharetapu o ngā puhi no whangaro me taha Waipupuke. Engari, ko e te kai whakahaere mō Tautiaki Wāhi Taonga. In terms of this section, I'm just going to break it down. We're in a time of change, a time of flux, but what that allows is for some reconsiderations in terms of change and then what comes next, and then also considerations of how things might be done better or what good looks like for yourselves and for others that are part of the process. And so in this section, we're looking at archaeology. When I talk about archaeology, the organisation looks at ngā tapuao o ngā tupuna or ancestral footprints. So the overriding shift and focus is going to be, or we're driving towards greater compliance, but we would like your input in terms of all your considerations about ancestral footprints and the effects, archaeological considerations, or how one might address signals like climate change, loss, intensification. We are seeking your input on how we might consider these. But tied into archaeology is also in compliance is what are some of the ways in which mana whenua, hapori, would like to be engaged? How do they see themselves as part of the process in terms of compliance, in terms of what do you want us to advocate on behalf of? What are your priorities and your concerns in this area? How can we do better in terms of hapori aspirations and delivering? Now, there's quite a broad spectrum across Te Ao Māori and hapori as to what's topmost of the list. Some have already signalled that they are interested in enhancement works. Others are concerned about loss. Others might want to focus on other areas, including training, workshops, collaborations. We want to know all of that. We would like your input, your ideas on how we do this, or how it could be refined, how we could deliver better in general. But also leadership. Leadership lies in, to some extent, in organisations that provide a platform or a catalyst, but the real leadership comes from communities themselves in seizing opportunities or identifying them, and then capitalising on that window of opportunity for change. And so for HNZPT, we've devised a model, but we need feedback and would like feedback on a model of, it's called for the moment EASY, but it's essentially ESIE, which is looking at elements of encouraging, strengthening, finding methods of intervention, but also enforcement where necessary. But again, what that looks like, how we measure it, how we engage like that, and like so. Passing the rākau over for you to tell us, what does that look like? How can we refine it? In any case, for that slide, that's what I wanted to cover for this section. I'm not sure if there's another slide to come after that might address some other things that we should run through.
Just that one, I think, Marketing. Yeah, it's big over to Dennis first. Was there anything else, Marketing, just before we flip to that?
Just in terms of compliance. Now, one way of looking at compliance is this flat model. Compliance by an focus. Think of documentation and information generated through the process as another means of inventory. Because essentially, when you're looking at archaeological material and reports, that is a cultural inventory of hapori, iwi, whānau, hapu, assets, the things that are treasures in Taonga. It's also a catalyst document for decision making, can be a catalyst for other things, and leads right into another type of listing, audit, inventory of cultural landscape, of place, of sites, of wahi, and that's with Rārangi Kōrero. I'll just hand over to my colleague, Dr. Whare. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, no taranaki tēnei tangata, Zealand Pouhere Taonga, tōku ingoa, namihi kia koutou. So kia ora, I'm the Kauwakatere Kaupapa Māori, Manager of Māori Heritage Recognition and Engagement. And even though my colleagues assure me that my background isn't too fruity, I'm just dialing in from the International Indigenous Research Conference at the University of Auckland, and I haven't been able to change the background on my phone, so aroha no tērā. Please don't take it as a comment on our professionalism within Heritage New Zealand, but we like this stuff. So I work specifically around the Rārangi Kōrero, the New Zealand Heritage List, and we work quite closely with wānau marae apu and iwi on recognising their places, their wā I tapu areas, and wā I tūpuna. And that's part of the wider listing process of historic places, Category 1 and Category 2. But for a number of years, we have specifically recognised wāhi tapu, and since 2014, wāhi tūpuna. And this process is a reactive to the aspirations of Apu and Iwi about the recognition of their places. It's part of a statutory process within the Heritage New Zealand Pouhere Taonga Act 2014, and it sets out a specific process that we must abide by. But from the outset, we engage, consult, and seek the agreement of mana whenua of the marae, hapu, and iwi, and so that we will react to their requests to recognise and list their places. These, of course, feed into the National Historic Landmarks, which is the national recognition of importance of places. Currently, we only have the Waitangi Treaty Grounds recognised as a NHL. However, we are working on hopefully growing those numbers. And a really important part of that is the agreement of the mana whenua to the recognition of a national historic landmark within their roe takiwa. However, we encourage all groups to follow this pathway, which starts off with the listing on the Rārangi kōrero. A question I often get asked is around the protective mechanisms within our Act, within Heritage New Zealand, of wāhi tapu, wāhi tūpuna. And the process really recognises these places, these wāhi tapu, wāhi tūpuna, acknowledges their mana, their tapu and their mauri, and preserves kōrero connection to place. What does act as a protective mechanism is the inserting of these places on district council and regional council schedules. And so that's really the protective element. But going through this process, we can ensure that they are placed on those district and regional plans and that we can advocate for those places. Tohu whenua really recognises and identifies experiences of heritage places and certainly is in a important mechanism to draw people to visit those places, both domestic and international visitors. We just recognised Okereto on the west coast, Te Tai Pautini, several weeks ago as our latest tohu whenua. And again, like much of our mahi, much of our work that we do, the support and agreement of mana whenua is integral to this process. And of course, sitting on top of that is listing on the World Heritage List. And so we certainly advocate and support this process. And going through our legislative process of listing, of recognising as a national historic landmark, it helps to build all the kōrero, all the resources, so that when putting forward to the World Heritage List, it goes through smoothly, and that's something that we can really help Māori communities with doing. And I'm not too sure what the next slide is.
Yes.
And it's still me. And so the Rārangi kōrero is particularly important because it recognises the value of tikanga Māori and Māori worldview in our places, our wāhi tapu, our wāhi tūpuna. Oftentimes, a lot of these places we can no longer access. They've been alienated into private land or crown land. Nonetheless, they are still important. Back in 2014, we included the classification of wāhi tūpuna because, of course, there are those connotations within our society of what a wāhi tapu is and perhaps isn't. And not always is it in the importance of connecting back to ancestors and our ancestors and those people who lived at places. So the Rārangi kōrero is a heritage identification system. It's quite a rigorous process that we have to go through. And within wāhi tapu, wāhi tūpuna, all of the recommendations, final recommendations, go through to the Māori Heritage Council. So we're really fortunate that the expert knowledge of those who are on the Māori Heritage Council are making those decisions about those wāhi tapu, wāhi tūpuna that are inserted into the Rārangi kōrero. And of course, engagement, whether within wāhi tapu, wāhi tūpuna or historic places, category 1, category 2. We're really ensuring that regardless of the place being listed, there's that recognition of the Māori history of that place. Yeah. And we're at the stage at the moment of being more proactive, I suppose, and setting priorities and being able to approach iwi hapu around potential projects. And certainly one idea we're really keen on within our team are foundational places. E pāna ki ngā tauranga waka o ngā waka tūpuna, o nā pā o ngā uinga a iwi, a apu, nā wā I waka ira tēnei, mō ngā iwi katoa o Aotearoa. And so we are, and we will be coming back to talk about some of these priorities in the new year. Because I'm sure, like everyone else, looking forward to the end of 2024 and having a break. But with all of these kaupapa, and those of you who are on the call now, and those we'll be talking to in the future, we're always open to a discussion. We pride ourselves of being out there within the community. And looking at the National Historic Landmarks, and it's certainly a discussion we're having with some iwi of how to elevate their wāhi tapu, wāhi tūpuna onto the UNESCO World Heritage List. And it's certainly a way to highlight for all of Aotearoa the importance of these places. Just this morning, I was watching the TVNZ Good Morning Show, and they were highlighted the Oamaru Historic District. And so a large part of that, of course, we're ensuring that Te Runaka or Moiraki are kept informed and included in all of those discussions. And so just to ensure that hapu iwi, as well as the wider community, have a say on those places that are included. Kia ora koutou. I don't know if I have another slide left, or shall I pass the football?
It comes back to me. Kia ora, Dennis, ngā mihi. So the last statement area is around our properties, and really so we have about 45 properties around the country. There are a lot in the north, but it is across both islands. But really, these properties are within communities, and it's realising their potential to connect our bicultural story of Aotearoa, New Zealand. We want to also develop the properties as places where we demonstrate, we do best examples of heritage conservation in our work. And what you'll find in the draft statement is also a more rigorous process around acquiring and disposing of properties, and of course properties that would be of interest to iwi as well. So there's some important elements within that, and I should also add, of course, a lot of these properties have collections as well, so there are taonga within these collections. So across a range of things, I think it's really important you have a look at the property statement part of these as you go over these, in terms of looking at putting in submissions. So we've probably come to the end. We've had a good period of presentation here, just thanks to Sonia, Markety and Dennis for that. But really it's now your time. And I see we've got a couple of questions already, I think. So we'll try and answer them. And we may go more broadly as well. We can see if anyone's got a hand raised if they want to do it that way. Oh, there we go. Sonia's, we just had a question around, you probably can all see this anyway. Oh, before I go any further, I know one job I didn't do at the beginning was actually introduce myself. So, karo. I was so busy thinking about, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, ko waio, ko Dīmaiting tōku ingo, ko te kaihautu Māori mō Pouhere Taonga, he uri o te whānau Apanui. So, apologise for that. Hui anō. And also, I should have said how long we're actually going to go for, which is, we've got until 12, and but this really just depends on what questions and responses you want in the space where we're at now. Hoiano, here we are. So yeah, how councils may be required to report on their heritage management activities on an ongoing basis. And Sonia, I think you replied. Yeah, just directing to those paragraphs in the general policy. It's something that we've done in the past as well, but you maybe some metrics you want to suggest as part of that going forward. So because it is something, because councils do things in different ways, as you all know, around the country, particularly for iwi that, you know, who are over different council boundaries, it must get quite complicated. Yeah, that's a really good one. Oh, one from Rachel. Kia ora, Rachel. Very interested to hear how hapu iwi can be encouraged to propose listings when the criteria is still very colonial focused, or engagement between Pouhere Taonga, kaimahi and hapu is still very stilted and lacking in understanding of mana whenua values. Also, how will engagement interface with iwi heritage policies, where statements, definitions may be at odds with Heritage New Zealand definitions? Well, I guess just the first part, actually just bringing it back to, and Dennis, you may have some comment on this, just maybe at a higher level in terms of the National Historic Landmarks and those things. These are really good opportunities to sort of rebalance how you might look at the list itself, because remembering that's been built over a long period of time, it does feel very weighted in one aspect of our bicultural history, that not of Māori heritage. But with this new tier, the top tier, it's a way in terms of rebalancing, I guess, the weighting of that. So that's a good one to focus on over time as well. So just do that. But Dennis, you might have a response to that as well.
Yeah, just on the response around ability of hapu and iwi to nominate their own places. We are a autonomous Crown entity and we do abide by legislation. But it's very clear in the ma'i that we do is that, well, one, anyone can nominate a place to be inserted onto the list as a wāhi tapu wāhi tūpuna. And that we ensure that from the outset there is a mandate that's endorsed by hapu and by iwi. And certainly within the tira, which is the Māori heritage team, we engage at all levels, recognising mana and hononga, all the connections that may be between that hapu and other hapu and iwi. And that the criteria for listing of wāhi tapu wāhi tūpuna are based on he tiroanga Māori, on a Māori worldview. Those cultural associations, that is what we abide by and that we follow and that we engage with hapu and iwi about. And for example, there are places we've listed that there is no physical evidence remaining for those places, just an empty paddock, but that doesn't take away the mauri of that place. And there are times at Heritage New Zealand we can do better and we aspire to do so. But bearing in mind, just as we respect hapu and iwi, also ask for that respect to be given back as Crown agents engaging on those things. We want to ensure that we follow tikanga at all times. Koina.
Good point. Good point. Oh, Markere, you were following on from that.
Just in relation to that, and for those people tuning in, we have 7 major centres, right? Regional offices. We have Pawarahi that sit in those offices. They would love to have discussions about suggestions, ideas about how we could do this and streamline it. Up here in my regions, I'm centred in Tamaki. We have engagements with iwi confeds and groups that they have a long list and they have a work program in their own schedule. We're interested in helping to produce these catalyst reports to assist and enable not only, you know, through process recognition and acknowledgement, but meaningful gains that drop out of some of these. I'm just saying some of the past listings, i.e. they used to be called registrations, have been places like Rangiriri, Orako Paiwai, Whatiwhati Hoi, and other places that have followed a theme. But they've also, you can measure the gains, you know, in terms of redress, aspiration, probably for every listing, probably 20 other dropouts working for everyone that's had input to some of these documents. They're catalyst documents, think of them that way. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Makere. Sorry, Tipina, I just see your hand up there. So, yeah, kia ora.
Ka pai, thank you, and thank you, team, for your presentation this morning. I've really appreciated it. I do want to spend a little bit of time just acknowledge the response, the paragraphs 1.37 and 1.38 cover monitoring and evaluation of council performance. It would be really good, picking up on your points, Dean, if there could be some consistent guidance for councils about how they are required to report, in terms of frequency, in terms of format, in terms of once they've reported. You know, we've got 6 councils that we work with. So, you know, giving that consistency and that guidance from you folks would be really important. And when you say HNZPT periodically publishing assessments, how periodic? And I think that would be something that would be really useful to have your Pouarahi and the 7 regions that you've just spoken about connecting on this type of monitoring and evaluation. Thank you.
Ka pai, really good comment. Thank you, Tignu. Yeah, I understand now, and I might be wrong, it's every 2 or 3 years that's done, so maybe not often enough, but it does take time, of course, going across, 70 odd councils and that, so but a good point. Kia ora. Kia ora, Rachel.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Thank you for that response there, Dennis. I think one of the key things too was just the point I put in there around engagement. How will the statements and engagement with hapu and iwi interface, where they have stated policies around cultural heritage? Just thinking of an exercise that we've been doing recently within Te Runanga o Ngaitahu, where some of our definitions around wahi tupuna, wahi tapu, tauka tūturu, etc., are not necessarily in line with Heritage New Zealand Pouhere Taonga's definitions. But there's another question I would like to raise as well, or maybe it's just a statement as such. And I sort of feel like I have to do a wee disclaimer about coming across as a bit of a grumpy person. But yeah, hey aha. So acknowledging the work that is done by the tira across the motu, and it is really valuable work. The statements look great. However, there is iniquity with the spread of Pouarahi right across the motu, with only one Pouarahi covering the entirety of Te Waipounamu, which is half the country. So it makes it really difficult to try and push forward with our own iwi and hapu aspirations in terms of our cultural heritage when working with Heritage New Zealand Pouhere Taonga. So I suppose I'm just looking for some sense of security that those statements are actually going to translate into what happens on the ground down here in Te Waipounamu.
Yeah, no, that's a good point in terms of the resource and how that's applied. So, you know, obviously that's always a challenge right around the motu, and it's always something. So it's good to understand that that's still an issue, or you know, wanting that to improve in some way. But remembering also that organisationally we are focused as well. It's not on one person, and that's probably another thing in thinking about these statements, that you see a much more interconnected way in which the organisation's working now. When you try to bring in those levels of engagement plans and things like that. So I'm not saying we're not not taking on board what you're saying about the specifics, but also to give some reassurance of the organisation moving into a more collective way of working. I wouldn't say it's completely there yet, but it's working towards that. But certainly take your point, Rachel. Ngā mihi. Kia ora. Now, no more hands, but Gerard, kia ora. Kia ora koutou. The strength of archaeological prisons hinge on the definition of archaeological method. Are those going to be brought up to date with the full extent of modern archaeological research methods, especially including landscape archaeological approaches? I would certainly hope so, and that's a good question. Do you want to sort of maybe give us a bit more understanding of the Makere? I'll throw it over to you, and if Jared wants to say a bit more about that, that's ka pai as well.
I think what we might need to hear is just from Gerard to kind of like just a bit of expansion on that.
Yeah.
Because we're all sitting in the forum, and some of us are keyed in, and maybe others, maybe not. I need a steer on focus, Gerard.
Kia ora, Gerard, are you there?
Kia ora, kia ora, kia ora.
Oh. Oh, I see why you typed.
Or in the chat, you know.
Can you hear us now?
That's okay. Yeah, that's okay. It's a bit quiet, but just, yeah.
Oh, ka pai. Oh, there's a microphone thing. Yeah, sorry, so I'm with Lana and Tiataro down at the museum, and yeah, sorry about the feedback. We had two computers running. Fundamentally, when the first archaeological policy statement got put out, it came back to this thing of describing what the archaeological methods were. And when we look at the Act requires, or it provides for the protection of the heritage, archaeological heritage, and the definition hangs on being able to inform on New Zealand history through the application of archaeological method. And so a lot of people have in the past interpreted this, and it's an old debate at the Māori Heritage Council, but sort of interpreted it as being, is there physical evidence there? Archaeology looks at physical evidence, and therefore, if there's a notion of physical evidence, that's what it means. Actually, it doesn't. The Act says we need to be able to apply archaeological method to those things. But the list of archaeological methods in the previous policy statement was quite a narrow band, and to be honest, a very dated list of what we would now consider archaeological methods. Tiataro here is about to start doing archaeology next year at university, and the range of archaeological methods he's going to learn about over the next 2 years, two or 3 years, is going to far outstrip the list of archaeological methods as listed in the current policy statement. It was an argument that some of us made in the review of the last policy statement, that the range of archaeological methods, especially looking at landscape methods in archaeology, should be extended. It wasn't really, and after all of these years, this is our opportunity to sort of see, hopefully, that addressed. And so really the question isn't so much what is going to be that better list of archaeological methods, but rather just seeking clarification that it is up for discussion again this time round, rather than what happened last time round where it was thought, oh, no, that's a bit hard, we'll stick with the status quo. So it's really, can we have a discussion around those? That's the question. Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora, Makere.
This is exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for meaningful input and discussion, and to have a robust discussion, because it's going to, across the motu, people are going to have their own ideas about what that looks like. We've had a 10-year period where there's been a huge amount of advance in technology and different kinds of ideas, different horizons and exposures. We would like to integrate all that and to hear that kind of feedback, because we need to we're trying to find better ways, right? The opportunity is there to seek a better way and to actually rewrite some things. And this is an area that I'm quite passionate about, but also passionate about having discussions, robust ones that are informed by kaitiaki, all kinds of kaitiaki, to advance the kaupapa, but to maximise, this notion of change. So I'm all for it, but we need ongoing, enduring discussions. If we're going to have this discussion, we're going to need to draw from different groups, and for that to happen, we need input. But the realm of influence is quite is realistic and pragmatic at this point in time. It's the right kind of setting for conditions to actually affect greater change, if people want to look at it that way. But the other thing is to give us a steer on some of these elements of interpretation that you were talking about, because for some people they make the distinction that the act is about presence or absence, and others have different ideas. We want to know how people view what their outlook is on the act, on our policies, these statements, and where we could be heading, where we should be heading, and what that looks like, and what the gauge and the measure is. What does good look like to use? Kia ora, aroha mai.
Yeah, and I think, excellent. And I had a quick look at what we're defining, and yeah, that is a sort of a current list of things, isn't it, in terms of definition, or an older list. And of course, also the things, particularly in those sort of predictive areas, or looking at patterns, particularly with AI-based sort of approaches to things. These are questions then open up around how information is managed, stored, and all of those sorts of issues as well. So, don't limit yourself to thinking about just the methods, but also where that information ends up, and possibly also how that is used over time as well. So, yeah, excellent. Kia ora, Rachel. Sorry, I just see your hand up.
Yeah, kia ora anō. This is just a quick pātai for Mākere, just following on from what you've just said. And just wondering if you've thought about maybe just having a specific engagement with kaihura on those very questions. Just realizing that a lot of the kaitiaki that are on the ground and working in that archaeological space may not necessarily engage with this type of forum or through a submission process, and it would be a really good thing to wānaka with the kaihura network. So yeah, hea for Carol.
Well, I would love to do that. We would love to do that. Look, a lot of kaitiaki at the coalface, they have their own forums. We would love to know what those forums are. We would love to be invited in to come and have a kōrero, a meaningful one, in dialogue. Would love to come face to face with some of my team, or even to have my team come out and engage that way. In terms of kaihura, yes, this is very much a topical discussion, but keeping a little bit of distance, there will be others that take the forefront of that discussion, obviously. But we're also keen to get to different kinds of audiences, a wide range of audiences and voices, to have some resonance, right? We need to build this picture and this story of not only addressing the now, but future-proofing. But we need to know where people want to head, what that looks like, and what you would like covered. There are some things where you might have high interest and you're demonstrating that now, and other spaces where you're quite comfortable with how things are. But long story short, send the invite. Would love to come and have a kōrero and a cup of tea. We will make the time.
Yeah, ka pai. Yeah, it's really important we're reaching the right people who have to work in this whole system. Just another quick thing around archaeology is, of course, in the way in which koiwi tangata is handled as well. And also those things in terms of like DNA research and other things that are starting to come to the fore. So the policies mightn't necessarily get to the detail that we're talking about, but it should overarch those areas, so guidance and policy can sit underneath that over time as well and can be developed. So we've just got to have enough capture so that over time we can start to fill the details, and as things change as they are rapidly. Now, I'm just realizing we've got about 5 minutes left, and I'd really love to make sure we capture anyone else who would like to put something up. Sorry, have I captured? I'm just checking with Angelica, who's sitting in the background there, who's looking after us and making sure everything. I haven't missed anything. I'm just checking in with Angelica.
Dean, one question from Charlene coming up at the moment.
Oh boy. Right, we'll wait Charlene to put that in. And just to cover, sorry, where are we? Yeah, just put there. Thanks, Angelica. Just to pop the other image up while we're waiting for the question. So obviously this was focused on Māori heritage today, but there are other opportunities of other webinars. There's a similar presentation and more generally that'll be in February. There's 2 in there, and of course submissions due in March. But like Makere has said, you know, we really any invitation to talk to others would be most welcome. Yep. So, I assume you've all. I know you've looked at the general policy, so that's no mystery where it is. It's up there, and of course, obviously, you know, we know a lot of you anyway, so you know, you can get in touch with us directly. But there is a submission email as well to work through if need be. Yeah. Yeah. So. Oh, kia ora. Kia ora, Charlene. Well, it's good to hear that'll come through. Ka pai. Is that? Oh, Marlborough District Council Heritage Strategy now. Ka pai.
We've had a number of discussions, and actually one of my pauarehe is very active out there, and probably if you haven't already come across him, Darren Kiraikipa, he's been interfacing a lot in terms of that and would love to have a kōrero with you, given it's tauihu.
Yeah. Ka pai. There any last check-ins or anything? If not, just thank you everyone. Ka nui te mihi kia koutou katoa. Ko haere mai nei kei wanganui i te kaupapa. And really appreciate that to our presenters, Sonia, Makere and Dennis. Also to Angelica, like I said, she's in the background pulling these things all together, and there's the team, the policy team that she's with that have, you know, are working on this whole process overall. So just a big mihi to them, but thank you again for coming along today. So we'll close with our karakia. I might hand to you, Dennis. Kia koe.
O kia ora mo tēnei kōrero e te, nāu anō I wakarite mai mō tātou. Kia koe hoki Angelica, mō nā mahi wake emi kōrero nei. Aha ko te wakahi, ka huri au ki a koutou mā I tāpiri mai ki te kōrero o te rangi nei. Nā mihi nui kia koutou. Mehe mea ka pirangi koutou te kōrero, waia mai, mera mai, haore e kore ka noho kapu tī tātou. Te oi, mā te karakia nei, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua I te ara takatu. Ko iara e rongo waka iri ake, ki runga, kia tīna, tīna. Aumi e, ui e, tai
ki e, kia ora tātou.
Haere ora koutou.